Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Tet. We learned in a Baraita yesterday the law regarding a motar Pesach. That means it's a korban, a sheep that was designated to be a korban Pesach. However, a korban Pesach is only valid if it's slaughtered on the 14th of Nisan. If this animal was not slaughtered and sacrificed on the 14th of Nisan, then what happens to it? Well, it remains consecrated, and afterwards, it doesn't matter if it's 2 days later or a month later, if someone does shechita on it, having in mind that it will be a korban Pesach, then it's pasul completely. However, if he has in mind anything else, then it will be a korban shelamim. So that means if he has in mind this is a korban shelamim, that's good. That's the best thing to do with it. It'll be a korban shelamim. And even if he has in mind, I'm taking this motar Pesach, that's the term, to mean something that is left over. It was a Pesach, but it wasn't used. It was designated as a Pesach, but wasn't used. And so now it's motar Pesach. If you have in mind it will be an olah, it ends up being a shelamim. You do shechita in having in mind it will be a chatat or asham, it is a kosher shelamim. That was the law of the Baraita. The Gemara asked, what's the source? And the father of Shemuel cited this pasuk here that is referring to a korban shelamim. And it's talking about the different types of korban shelamim and the different animals that you can bring it from. And the simple reading is that if you want to bring a korban shelamim from sheep, then it will be and just telling you that if you pick a sheep to be a zebach shelamim, then it can be a male or female, and it gives you all the rest of the details. However, the Gemara is interpreting this as referring to a motar Pesach. If there is a type of korban that can be brought from sheep, well, what type of korban can be brought from sheep? A korban Pesach. Oh, so that means if you have a sheep that was designated for a Pesach, and now it's motar Pesach, and you slaughter it, it will end up being a shelamim. That's how we understood this pasuk. And so we went on and we brought various derivations and explanations of this. We tried out a kalal uprat uklal, and we rejected it. And now we're going back to the reading that this word zevach is extra. It could have simply said im menason korbanot shelamim, and the word zevach is extra to teach me that if I have in mind any zevach, no matter what I have in mind, as long as it's not, I don't have in mind it'll be a Pesach, that's no good. But if I have in mind it'll be an olah or hatat or shelamim or asham, anything, then it will end up being a shelamim. So we're going back to that derivation. Ela lezevach ribuyahu. We're not using a kalal uprat, not a kalal uprat uklal, but rather a ribuy. This is an extra word. Good. But now we have a question. We asked this question also yesterday, and there was an answer, but we're not accepting that answer now. And we're going to try a different way. And so the question is, why not say that the word zevach is extra? I understand, and maybe it's coming to teach me that whatever I have in mind, that's the type of korban it will be. If I have a motar Pesach and I have in mind it'll be an olah, then it'll be a valid olah. Or chatat, it'll be a valid chatat. Or shalamim will be a valid shalamim. How do you know that no matter what I have in mind, except for Pesach, it will always be a shalamim? That's the question. Amar Rabbi Abin, dochin kodashim hanechalim esel kodashim hanechalin, ven dochin kodashim hanechalim esel kodashim she'enan nechalin. Rabbi Abin said that we can divert an animal that was designated to be eaten. That's a korban Pesach. Anyone can come and eat korban Pesach. They have to be tahor and so on, but anyone can eat it. So when we're diverting it, because now it's a motar Pesach, we're going to turn it into something else that also can be eaten, like a shelamim. And we're not going to take something that can be eaten, namely again a korban Pesach, and turn it into something that cannot be eaten, like an olah. And so therefore, when it's motar Pesach, it will have to end up being, it can't be a Pesach a month after, but it can be something that is similar to a Pesach, and Shalamim is similar because it's also eaten, and that's why even if you have in mind an Olah, it'll end up being a Pesach. Atu chatat v'asham mi la mit achli. We challenge Rabbi Abin, but what about a chatat and asham? Those korbanot are also eaten. They're eaten by kohanim. So you could say that if I have in mind it'll be a chatat, let it be a chatat, because that's eaten also, like a korban pesach is also eaten. Ela dochin kodashim manechalim lechol adam esel kodashim manechalim lechol adam ve'en dochin kodashim manelachin lechol adam esel kodashim shenechalin lechol adam. So rather, we're going to put a finer point on Rabbi Abin's answer and say that we will divert a sacrifice that could have been eaten by anyone, that's a korban pesach, and divert it to another type of korban that also can be eaten by anybody. That's a shelamim. And we're not going to take a korban that can be eaten by anybody, a korban pesach, and turn it into a korban that can only be eaten by kohanim and not anybody else, a chatat and asham. So that explains why this motar pesach cannot become not an olah, not a chatat, and not an asham, but rather has to be another shelamim, which also can be eaten by anyone. The Gemara is going to ask a question about this, like what about korban todah and other sacrifices that also can be eaten by anybody? We're going to ask that in a question here. But first, another response to the opening question. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Avin Amar, Dochin kodashim kalim esel kodashim kalim, ven dochin kodashim kalim esel kodshe kodashim. A different version, Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Abin, said that one can divert kodashim kalim, something that's lesser sanctity, into another thing that also is lesser sanctity. And you cannot take, so that would be korban pesach to a shelamim. Both are lesser sanctity. And you cannot take something that is lesser sanctity, korban pesach, and turn it into kodshe kodashim, like an olah in asham or a chatat. So this would be another similar way to reject this possibility that whatever you have in mind, that's what it will be. No, it can't. The motar pesach has to remain somewhat like the original pesach. Matkif la Rav Yitzchak b'Rabbi Sabriyu. However, we have a challenge against this from Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Savriyu. Emma shechateh l'shem ma'aser leve ma'aser. You have not excluded the possibility that if you have a motar pesach and you do shechita, having in mind that this should be a ma'aser. Every 10th animal that is born in a certain year is ma'asar behema. It is consecrated, and the owner brings it and has to bring it as a sacrifice to Yerushalayim. So why not say that if one took a motar, it's kadashim kalim, and so maybe if he brings a motar pesach and does shechita as ma'aser, so let it be ma'aser and not a shelamim. Lemay hilchata. Now, what's the difference between a korban that's ma'aser and a korban shelamim? Because they're very similar in many aspects that regarding people eating it and kadashim kalim. And the difference is delali ba'en nisachim. Korban ma'aser does not require any libations to come along with it, but shelamim does. Ul milka ale be'lo yigael. And also ma'aser has a special law that it cannot be redeemed, it cannot be sold, and that's not true for a korban shelamim. So that would be the difference if it's a ma'aser or a shelamim. Amar Kera, the answer to this challenge is Hasiri ye kodesh ze ma'aser ve'en acher ma'aser. Since regarding the 10th animal, it says the 10th will be sacred, meaning only every 10th animal as it's walking through the gate, you count 1 to 9, and then the 10th one, that is sacred as a korban ma'aser. That's the only way for a korban to become sacred as a korban ma'aser, and not from a motar pesach. Motar pesach can't become a ma'aser animal. That's what we learned from this midrash, and so that takes care of this challenge. This is the first of 4 challenges. Second one, Emma shechateh l'shem bechor le'eve ki bechor lemay hilcheta delali ba'e nesachim inameh de letebe lekohanim. Why not say that if one took a motar pesach and you did shechita having in mind it would be a firstborn animal, which also is a sacred animal, so why not say it turns into that, because you had that in mind. It's kadashim kalim and people can eat it, so let it it be a bechor. Now, what's the difference between a bechor and a shilamim? Oh, a bechor does not require any libations as a shilamim does, and a bechor has to be given to kohanim, whereas a shilamim does not have to be given to kohanim. So there would be a practical difference. So why not say that it will turn into a bechor? And the answer is bechor dameh, avara mimaaser gamar. We have a gezerah shava that says v'ha'abarta kol peter rechem lahashem. It says regarding a bechor, and it says kol asher ya'abor tachat hashabet, every 10th animal that walks under the rod. Since it says the word avad in both contexts, we make a gezerah shava, and therefore just like a maaser animal can only become a maaser animal through that process, so too a bechor can only become holy as a bechor if it's actually born first, and you can't take a motar pesach and turn it into a bechor. Therefore, even if you have in mind it'll be a bechor, it'll end up being a shelamim. Third challenge, how about if you take this motar behemah, as you're doing shechita, you say, this is going to be a timura. Timura means, if I have a consecrated animal and I try to switch it for another one, then the original one remains, and the new one also becomes holy. That's the timura animal. So if I say, this is going to be a timura, so let it have the laws of timura. What would be the practical difference between a timura and a shilamim? Well, timura, you get lashes because you're not allowed to substitute one animal for another. Not only does it not work, and the original animal is holy, and the new animal is holy, you also get lashes. But for a shilamim, you wouldn't get lashes. Or the prohibition against selling it or redeeming it applies to a timura, does not apply to a regular shilamim. And so that would be the difference. So why not say that if it's for a timura, it will be a timura? Amar mozutra bered Rav Nachman amar kerabayahu utmurato zo timura ve'en acher timura. Because the pasuk says that if you try to consecrate another one, then the original one and the new one that you exchange it for will be holy, and that's specifying, limiting that is a timura, but there's no other way to make something into a timura. A motar pesach cannot turn into a timura. Last challenge, ve'ema shechate l'shem toda leveki toda l'may hilchata lahat'ino lechem. So how about if he did shechita on this motar pesach and had in mind that it will be a korban toda, so then say it will be a korban toda. That also is kadashim kalim, it's eaten by anybody. Now, what is the difference between a korban toda and a korban shilamim? A korban toda requires 40 loaves of bread to be brought with it. And so then, if you have in mind for a toda, maybe it will be a toda, and now you have to bring 40 loaves. And we challenge that. Wait, can there be such a thing that the Pesach itself, if this was actually slaughtered on the 14th, then you would not bring lechem on it. Actually, you're not allowed to bring any bread with the Korban Pesach. And now you're going to tell me that, but the leftover of Pesach does require bringing bread and 40 loaves? How does it make sense that the leftover should be more stringent than what the original Korban was supposed to be? But with that would be an answer. But we challenge that answer. Then you could ask the same question when it becomes a shilamim. How could it be that the Korban Pesach itself, which does not require libations, now is going to turn into, if it's motar pesach, into a shilamim that requires libations? So even in the regular standard case, the substitute, the motar, has obligations that the original didn't. So that's not a challenge. Anan hachi kamrina. No, this is what we meant when we answered that question. Mi ikamidi de motar toda atzma la ba'elechem vilu motar da'atya lehu me'alma ba'ya lechem. Can it be that they're a motar toda? That's, let's say I promised I'm going to bring a toda. I designated one animal, then I designated another animal because the first one got lost, and then I found it. So then whichever one I sacrificed first as a toda will be the regular toda with 40 loaves. The other one that I found sometime later, I will sacrifice it as a toda, but it does not require bread. So how could it be that a motar toda doesn't require bread, but something that was a motar pesach that turns into a toda should require bread if if a motar todah itself doesn't require bread, then something that was not even originally a todah certainly should not require bread. And so that's how we answer the final question. And so now we're good. We have a proof that for the law from this word lechem in this pasuk, from the word zevach in this pasuk, that any motar pesach, and right now we're assuming that vimin hason korbano is talking about korban pesach. We're going to challenge that next. But if we do assume that Korban Pesach is a type of sacrifice that you bring a sheep for, so this is referring to a sheep, and then it says lezebach, if you slaughter it for any reason other than Pesach, it will be a shelamim. And you say, why can't it be like anything else? Why can't it turn into anything else? Because it's going to have to be like a shelamim, in that it's something that's eaten, and we saw all the other possibilities that we rejected one by one, and so by process of elimination, whatever you have in mind, it will end up turning into a kosher shelamim. Matkif la Rav Yamar bered Rav Hillel umimai de bemotar Pesach ketib dilma bemotar Asham ketib. Now Rav Yamar, the son of Rav Hillel, is going to challenge the father of Shemuel's derivation and ask, this pasuk imin hason korbano lezebach shelamim ladonai, from which you derive that motar Pesach is going to be a shelamim. How do you know that when it says min hatson that is referring to a motar Pesach? Maybe it's referring to a leftover asham. You had an asham animal, and then you used a different animal for your asham obligation. And then you found this asham. What are you going to do with the leftover asham? Well, you slaughter it, and it will turn into a shelamim, because this could fit. An asham also comes from son. Son is a catch-all word that includes keves and aiz. Son means a small animal as opposed to bakar. Bakar means a big animal, an ox, a cow. Son is a small animal. And then you see in the paragraph on shelamim, it says, if you're going to bring a son, a small animal, then subcategory 1, kebes, is a sheep. And then in verse 12, im ayaz, if it's a goat. So that's going to be important in a second. Im kebes, so since an asham also is brought from, im son, since a asham also is brought from son, maybe this is referring to motar asham. Amar Rava, Amar Kera, imin hason korbano lezebach shelamim davar hashaveh bechol hason. So Rava says no, because it says if from the flock, well, his korban will be. So that has to refer to a korban pesach, which can be from any type of flock of small animal, sheep or goat. And so it has to be something that will be effective in any type of son, sheep and goat. That's true for korban pesach. That's not true for an asham. Asham is only from a ram, only from a male sheep, not a goat. And that's why it fits better with motar pesach rather than motar asham. Matkif la Rabbi Abin bar Chaya, v'item Rabbi Abin bar Kahana. Bechol atad at amart min lehosi, v'chan min lerabot. And now Rabbi Abin, either the one that's the son of Chaya or the son of Kahana, says, this derivation that you're saying, Rava, does not make sense, because everywhere else in the Torah, we always say that min is a limiting word. It's a from among, it's a subset of something. And here you're saying min has to be lirabot, right? In other words, we can back up the challenge that we started with by saying min hason, from among the flock, one thing from among the flock. So then easily you could say a ram from among all the flock, that will be asham. So it could fit the pasuk fine. And you're not taking it that way. You're saying min hason, that has to be something that can come from any type of flock, sheep or goats, and therefore Pesach. But why all of a sudden are you treating min as an expansionary word and not as a limiting word? Amar Rabbi Mani, hacha name min lehosi dela te ben shete shanim velo ate benekeva. And Rabbi Mani answers on behalf of Rava and says, here also min is in fact limiting, because a korban pesach cannot be from any flock. Rather, it cannot be something that's 2 years old, meaning in its second year. It has to be only within its first year. And the korban pesach also cannot be from a female. It has to be a male within its first year, although it can be from sheep or goats. So that the word min, in fact, does work here. It's a subcategory, not every type of flock, but only some. But it does have to fulfill the two subcategory paragraphs that come after. It has to have min hason. It is min hason, and it can be kebes, and it can be in ez. Now, the min is still a limiting word because within kebes and ez, it's going to have to be male within its first year. So the min is no problem. Matkif la Rav Hana Bagdata'a. Rav Hana from Baghdad said, Mi masit amart, dechi ketib hai b'motar pesach ketib, hamedichtib im kebes, im ez, mikelal de la b'motar pesach ketib. How can you say that that first pasuk that talks about son is talking about motar pesach? After all, in the next pasuk and then the one in the next paragraph that gives the two subcategories, it talks about keseb and it talks about ez. And we know that korban pesach from other sources can be from a sheep or a goat. So therefore, those pasukim by themselves would tell me, oh, this is talking about something related to a pesach, which is also from keseb and ez. So that's motar pesach. So I could learn it from the subsequent two pesukim, verses 7 and 12. And therefore, since I know it from that, I don't need the first pasuk, the opening pasuk, iminason, pasuk 6, to tell me about korban pesach also. So it must be talking about something else. We have too many pesukim now to teach me the same thing. And the answer is, actually, these pesukim here, im keseb, im ez, are come to teach me something else. Keseb lerabot et ha-pesach le'aliyah. The word keseb is teaching me that when I bring korban pesach, I also have to offer the tail. I know that this is true for other types of sacrifices, but it never says that regarding korban pesach, that the tail also has to be sacrificed. Keshehu omer im keseb lerabot pesach she'ibera shenata u shlamim habaim mechamat pesach lechol misvot shelamim. And when it says not just keseb, kebes, but im kebes, here we learn from kebes this part, and then it says im kebes, that's going to include also something that was designated as a korban pesach that its year has passed. It passed its first birthday. Since it passed its first birthday, it cannot be used as a korban pesach anymore. And so that is going to be used as a shelamim. And also, if you have a korban shelamim that is brought together with the korban pesach, that's on the 14th of Nisan, we bring the korban pesach and we also bring a korban hagiga, which is a shelamim. And we eat it that night. We eat it so that we will not be so hungry. We'll eat that as the meal, and then we'll eat korban pesach as the mitzvah, not just because we're starving to eat it. And so that's the shelamim that comes with the pesach, and comes to teach me that both of these we are should follow all the laws of shelamim. She'ita'anu semicha unsachim utnufat chazeh v'shok, and that includes that they need semicha, and you have to bring the other libations that come with them, and you have to wave the breast and the thigh. And so this what korban chagiga is a shelamim, and also korban pesach that now you can't use as korban pesach anymore, and you turn into a shelamim. You also follow all of the strictures. That's why it says im kebes. Keshu omer im az hifsik ha'inyan limed ala az shena teuna aliyah. Now, why does it then say im az? It's giving this a new paragraph to teach me that there is a difference between a kebes and an ez, in that in ez you do not bring the tail. That's basically the only difference between them. And so by putting it in two paragraphs, you see, ez does not need a tail, therefore the kebes does require that the tail be put on the mizbeach. And so that's what I'm learning from these two paragraphs. So I have a lot to learn from these two paragraphs, and therefore the opening pasuk I also need for motar pesach. והמהכה נפקא מדאבו דשמואל נפקא דאמר אבו דשמואל ואם מן הסון קורבנו לזבח שלמים דבר הבא מן הסון יהא לזבח שלמים. So now a follow-up question. You just said that an animal that is over 1 year past its first birthday will be a korban shelamim. Well, that is a type, it itself is a type of motar pesach. It's kind of the same thing. And so do I need this pasuk now, im kebes, to teach me this law, that once it's 1 1 year old. I can't be used for Pesach. Now it's going to be like a Motar Pesach and used for Shelamim. But we already have the derivation from the opening pasuk, as we cited before, from the father of Shemuel, who said, quoting pasuk 6, if you're going to bring a shelamim from a son, the korban zebach shelamim, it will be zebach shelamim. What does that mean? Imin hason. It means something, a type of sacrifice that is brought from son, which is a korban pesach. And now, if it's motar, pesach passed, so that'll be a korban shelamim. But the point is that you can't offer it as a korban pesach because pesach passed. Over here, you can't offer it as a korban pesach because it's already past its first birthday. But it's basically learning the same thing. I mean, it's identical cases. And now we have two derivations still for the same law. Now, as you explained to me why I need those two paragraphs, im kebes, im ayez, we learn lots of other things from them, but included in them is the Korban Pesach that's a year old. Well, so that basically covers the same ground as the derivation from Pasuk 6. Vakate, and before we answer the question, we're going to make it even worse by showing that there's a third Pasuk that teaches us the same thing. Rav Nachman Amar Abba Bar Avu Nafka. Damar Rav Nachman Bar Amar Abba Bar Abu. Minayin lemotar Pesach shekareb shelamim sheneemar vezabachta Pesach laHashem Elokecha son ubakar v'alo en Pesach ba ela min hakebasim umin ha'ezim ela mikan lemotar Pesach she'el ledabar haba min hason umin habakar umaynihu shelamim. We already saw this derivation also on an earlier daf. Rav Nachman said the name of Rabba Bar Avu. How do we know that motar Pesach will end up being a shelamim? As the pasuk says, you will slaughter a Pesach laHashem, and it says son ubakar. That's what it says in Devarim. That goes against Shemot. Shemot says that's only from a small animal, sheep or goats, and here it says it can be from son, the flock, and bakar, even a cow. Well, but Korban Pesach can only come from kebasim and ha'izim. Why does it say in Devarim that it can be from bakar, from a large animal? Rather, it must be that this is teaching us regarding Motar Pesach that it will be, what do you do with the leftover Pesach? Well, it will turn into something that you can offer from both son and a bakar. What is that? Shelamim. Shelamim, you can choose a small animal or a big animal. So this pasuk is telling me that a motar Pesach you treat as a shelamim. Ela telata kira'eh ketibi. Now we have a problem. We have three pesukim teaching us the same thing. It's nice to get reminders, but the Torah is not going to waste extra words. So all three must be necessary. Chad le'ibera zemano ve'ibera shenato. V'chad le'ibera zemano ve'lo shenato. V'chad le'ibera lo zemano ve'lo shenato. So actually they're teaching us three slightly different cases, and each one is important to learn. The one of them, of these Pesukim, is teaching me a case where I designated a Korban Pesach before Pesach, but then the time passed, meaning Pesach passed, so I can't use it for Pesach, and also its birthday passed, its first birthday. So there's two reasons why it can't be a Korban Pesach. That will be offered as a Shelamim. And the second pasuk is teaching me that Ibera Zemano, the Pesach has passed, even though it's within the first year. You might have thought it's still within the first year. Maybe it could be a kind of a Korban Pesach, not a Shelamim. Even there, no. Once Pesach passes, it'll be a Shelamim. I mean, automatically by the next Pesach, it's going to be over a year old. And the third one, what if it did not pass Pesach and did not pass this first year? I designated this a few days before Pesach, and it's within its first year, it's before Pesach. I could bring it on Pesach. Instead, I do shechita on it a couple of days before Pesach as a shelamim. That's valid. That's a kosher shelamim, even though it can be a korban Pesach soon. That's another chidush. Userichi. Now I need all three. I couldn't learn any one of these laws from the other. If you only had one pasuk, that would teach me that the Pesach has passed and the birthday has passed. There, it's completely rejected from being a Korban Pesach, so then for sure it's going to be a Korban Shelamim. But let's say Pesach passed, but it's still within the first year, so I might think, I have to keep this for Pesach Sheni. 1 month later, I can offer it as a Korban Pesach again. So therefore I might think that if I offer it as a Korban Shelamim 2 weeks later, in the middle, between Pesach and Pesach Sheni, maybe I would think it's not good. I can't make it a Korban Pesach. I cannot make it a Korban Shelamim because I have to wait for Pesach Sheni, and therefore the second pasuk comes and says, not true. You can even offer it beforehand as a Korban Shelamim. V'katav rachamana hanetarte mishum de'idechu ideche lehu memiltaihu aval hechadela aval lo zemano v'lo shenato techazi lepesach ema la serichi. And if I even have had those two, I would say, well, in both of those cases, it's rejected from its original status as a Pesach offering. But let's say it's before Pesach and it's within his first year, where I just have to wait till Pesach comes and I can bring it as a Korban Pesach. There I might think I'm not allowed to bring it as a Shelamim, and therefore the third pasuk comes to teach me that, yes, I can. Even before Pesach, I can change it into a Shelamim, and it will be a kosher Korban Shelamim. Amar Rav Mishemeh de Mavog. The famous Amorah Rav said in the name of a sage named Mavog, who seems to have been from a city Mavog in Syria. Not a very well-known sage, but here we have a teaching from him. Hatat sheshechata leshum hatat nachshon keshera. Damar qera zot torat hachatat torah achat lechol hachataot. All right, this is a little complex. Let's review the laws of hatat. The Mishnah said that if you have a korban chatat and one slaughters it in the name of a different type of korban, it is no good, totally pasul. So that's if shinui kodesh. However, if you slaughter it for a different baal, for a different person, then we learned the law of Rava, that it depends. If you slaughter it for someone else that requires a korban chatat, it's going to be no good, because it says v'chiped ala velo al chabedo. However, if you slaughter it for someone who has to bring a korban olah, then it's okay, because that's not called havero, and so the chatat can serve as a korban olah if it's for a different person who is not liable to a korban chatat. With that in mind, he says, a chatat that was slaughtered as a chatat of Nachshon is kosher. Nachshon is Nachshon ben Aminadav, one of the Nesi'im, during the dedication of the Mishkan. All the Nesi'im, including Nachshon, so you could have picked anybody, we're just using an example of Nachshon. Now, Nachshon, he did not make a sin that required a korban chatat. Rather, this was a special korban chatat in celebration and in inauguration of the Mishkan, not because of a sin. That's one way it's special. It's also different from other cases in that Nachshon is long deceased. So we'll see which of those two is the key factor here. But for now, he's proving it from the pasuk that says, Zot Torat HaChatat. Since it says Torat, this is the law of the Chatat. It teaches that there's one law for all sin offerings, all different types, and therefore, if you switch, and this is this type of korban chatat, and you switch it for a different type of korban chatat, it's kosher. And so therefore, if you switch a regular chatat to a chatat nachshon, it's kosher. Yatev Rava v'kamar la lehashma'ata. Now we're going to analyze the law itself first, but before that we're going to analyze the derivation. So Rava was repeating this law. Itibed Rab Mishashia leRava. Rab Mishashia challenged Rava. Rabbi Shimon omer, kol hamenachot shenikmesu shelo lishman kesherot v'alu laba'alim l'shum chova. The challenge is going to be from the derivation Zot Torat HaChatat, because there's a similar phrase regarding menachot, Zot Torat HaMincha. So if you're going to say that whenever it says Zot Torat, it means you can treat them all the same, well then you'd have to apply that to also menachot. Now here's a law of menachot that's taught by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Any korban mincha that you take the handful, not for its sake, is kosher. And not only is it kosher, but it even fulfills the obligation for the owner. Lefi, shena menachot domot lizbachim, because there's a fundamental distinction between meal offerings and animal offerings. Animal offerings, we said, if you do it not l'shem, then it's not going to fulfill the obligation of the owner. But mincha offerings are different. How? Shakomes machabat l'shem marcheshet ma'aseha mochichin alea shi machabat. Charevad l'shem belula ma'aseh mochichin shehi chareva. If someone takes a meal offering that's supposed to be pan-fried, and instead he makes it deep-fried, so then his wrong intention makes no difference, because his action show speak louder than words. Actions speak louder than words and thought. And therefore, from the fact that he's doing this, that means that's what it's going to be, and therefore it's okay. Or if it's supposed to be dry and without oil, and he makes it with oil, again, the action says that this is what it's going to be, and the wrong thought makes no difference. When you have an action in presence of a thought, we can ignore the thought, it doesn't matter, and now he's doing this, so it will be what he is doing, and therefore it's kosher and fulfills the obligation. But regarding animals, that's not true. If you do shechita on an animal from the outside, no one can tell what type of korban this is. You do shechita, and as long as it's an animal that can be for this and that, you wouldn't know if it's l'shem, this type of animal, or that type of this type of korban, or that type of korban. And therefore, shechita is the same. Receiving the blood looks the same for any korban. Sprinkling of the blood looks the same for many different korbanot. And therefore, you can't tell from the action. So that's why that's why thought is important. Intention is important regarding a korban, an animal sacrifice, and it will not fulfill the obligation. But with a meal offering, you can tell from the action what the person is doing, and therefore the wrong intent we don't care about. Ta'ama de ma'aseh ha'mochichin, ha'en ma'aseh ha'mochichin la. Amai, lema torat zot torat ha'mincha, Torah achat lechol ha'menachot. And here's Rabbi Shashia's question. You see that in this baraita of Rabbi Shimon, says the reason why one korban mincha is good, even if you had intended for a different korban mincha, is because the actions prove what the person is actually doing. And why? Why are you learning it from that? Why not derive it from a pasuk? Because it says this is the Torah of mincha, and therefore it's one law for all meal offerings, and it doesn't matter if you made it this way instead of that way. It's all okay. So why don't we learn it from there? If that methodology is correct, the fact that we don't learn it from the pasuk, but instead bring this reasoning, that means this methodology is not valid. Ela itmar hachi itmar. So now we are going to update the law that we learned from the sage. Amar Rav Mishmeh de Mavog. Chatat shechata al menat sheyitkaper ba nachshon keshera en kapara lemetim. If you have a korban chatat and you slaughtered it on condition that it will be for nachshon, that's kosher because nachshon is long deceased. If it was a person who was alive, so now you're changing it from this person to that person. That's no good. That's shinui be'alim, and it will not atone for that person. However, if you take this korban chatat and you say this is for nachshon, since nachshon is dead, so he's not considered an owner, it's not considered a change of owner, and therefore it's valid. Now we ask, velema met be'alma, why would Mavog choose this strange example of nachshon ben Aminadav? Just say any deceased person. It just could be, someone who died last year. Right? Why pick the example of nachshon? Ha kamashmalan ta'amar demet. Ha dechai dumya de nachshon pesula. Umaynihu chatat nazir v'chatat mesora. It's using this example of nachshon ben Aminadav to teach me that the only reason why this korban is valid, the one it's regular korban chatat, I did it in the name of nachshon ben Aminadav, it's valid because nachshon has long deceased. That's why. But if it was for someone who was alive and is in other respects the same as nachshon, in that nachshon did not bring it for a sin, so someone else that also is bringing a korban chatat not for a sin, then it would not be okay because he's alive. It has to be someone who's dead. That's the only case where chatat for the wrong reason would be kosher. But if it's someone alive, then it's not kosher, even if it's someone who didn't make a sin. Now, what's an example of that? Nachshon is he brings it not because of a sin, but because of the rededication of the Mishkan. But we're not going to do that again and again. So that's just a one-time thing. So what's an example of someone who could be alive now, who is bringing a chatat, but not because of a sin, that's a nazir and a mesorah. A nazir, when he's finished his nizirut, he's bringing a korban chatat, not because he made any sin. I mean, there is a lot of discussion. Ramban, what did he actually do wrong? Because he became an ascetic, because he's not an ascetic, but it's officially not because of a specific sin. So therefore, this is a type of korban chatat that's not for a sin. Mesorah also. Mesorah is associated with lashon hara. It's not a good thing, but it's not officially because of a sin like haleb. That's an actual prohibition directly. You have to bring it. Mesorah is just associated with lashon hara, but it's not necessarily so. And therefore, Mavog is picking Nachshon ben Aminadav to say, only because he is deceased, that's why this korban is kosher. But if it was someone like Nachshon who's alive, it would not be valid. But we reject this. Actually, it should very well be valid, because the chatat of a nazir and the chatat of a mesorah are basically the same as an olah. It is officially a chatat, but because it doesn't have a sin involved with it, therefore should be treated as an olah, and therefore we should talk about this as a case that we have discussed with Rava, of someone who does shechita to a korban chatat on behalf of someone who is not liable to a korban chatat, but rather a korban olah. And we said that one is okay. And so this should be the same thing, because there's no sin that's involved in it. If someone is bringing the first person who brought the korban chatat, he made a sin. Now he's doing it on behalf of not chavero, because it's someone who didn't make a sin. Even if it's a chatat, if it's a nazir and mesorah, it's not a sin, it's more like an olah. Ela I itmar hachi itmar. Okay, a new version of what he says. Amar Rav Mishemeh de Mavog, chatat shechata al mishemechuyav chatat, kenachshon keshera, chatat nachshon olahi. Indeed, it says exactly this, that a korban chatat, someone has to bring korban chatat because they ate cheleb. And then when someone was doing shechita, they did it on behalf of someone who has to bring a korban chatat like nachshon, right? It could be nachshon or a nazir or a mesorah, and that is a valid, that's kosher, because that would be the same, because the chatat of nachshon is an olah. It's literally a chatat, but it's like an olah, not because of sin. So if you bring it for anyone that's not because of sin, it is kosher. Ika da amar, and there's another version, which is a slightly different case, so these are both true. Amar Rav Mishemeh de Mavog, chatat shechata l'shem chatat nachshon, pesula, chatat nachshon olahi. And others say that the law that he reported was a chatat that you slaughtered as a chatat of nachshon. That's no good, because chatat nachshon is an olah. Here you're not changing the baal. The first example was changing the baal. I'm doing this korban for that person, and that person has to bring a olah type of chatat. That's okay, because that's shinui ba'alim for someone who didn't sin. This case here is where you're doing shinui Hashem. You're offering this regular korban chatat as a nachshon chatat. But a nachshon chatat is an olah. So it's the same as taking a korban chatat and slaughtering it for myself as an olah. And that's shinui Hashem. That's the case of the Mishnah, which is no good at all. Last question here. Velema chatat nazir v'chatat mesorah. Why mention chatat nachshon? Because the same law would be true regarding a chatat nazir and a chatat mesorah. As long as it's not for someone who sinned, it's like an olah, and so therefore there would be the same law. So why not mention those examples if it would be true for those examples? And the answer is ikad chatat nakat. It brought the first example of a korban chatat, even before there ever was a nazir or a mesorah who brought a korban chatat, before the Mishkan was even up and running, the inauguration of the Mishkan. Here, this was the first korban chatat that was brought, and therefore we want to bring the example from the first chatat brought in the Mishkan. Amar Rav, chatat cheleb sheshechata l'shem chatat dam, l'shem chatat avodah zara keshera. Rav says, if one has to bring a chatat because he ate cheleb by mistake, and he has this designated as korban chatat, and then the kohen or someone did shechita for the sake of the very same person, but for the sin of eating blood, which is also liable to karet if you did it on purpose, and shogeg would be korban chatat. So it's the same type of korban chatat, and it's the very same person. That's okay, because there's no difference. It's not shinui be'alim, and it's not shinui kodesh, because it's the same person and the same type. It just happens to be for a different sin that he also did. And similarly, if he takes a chatat cheleb and he uses it for a chatat for avodah zarah, that also, same thing, it's the same person and same type of korban. It's a slightly different type because this one is for avodah zarah, but it is still for something that if you did it on purpose, you'd get karet. If you did it by mistake, you get korban chatat. And therefore, there's no substantial difference, and it's the same. It's kosher. L'shem chatat nazir, l'shem chatat mesorah pesula, hane olot ninhu. However, if he did shechita for someone who was supposed to bring a chatat cheleb, and instead he brings it for that very person, but as a chatat nazir or chatat mesorah, it's no good, because those, since they don't come because of sin, are a completely different category. They are equivalent to an olah. And if you do shechita v'chatat, and as having in mind that it's an olah for this very same Baal, then it's no good, unfit completely. So all that makes sense. That's Rav's statement. He's first generation. Rava comes in the fourth generation and, based on this, asks a follow-up question. Ba'e Rava, chatat cheleb sheshechata l'shem chatat detumat migdash v'kadashav mahu. Mi'amrinan karet kemota, or dilma en kavua kemota. Someone has a designated a chatat cheleb because they ate cheleb by mistake. And then the Kohen comes and he does shechita for this person, but he does it for the sake of a chatat that is brought for bringing tuma into the mikdash, or eating a sacrifice while tameh. Now this requires a korban oleh veyored, which is a type of korban chatat, but a different type. Now, what do we say about this? Do we say that this is a karet? If you did it on purpose, you came to the mikdash tameh on purpose, you would get karet, and therefore it's of the same type. It's the same Baal, so there's no problem of shinui Baal, and it's the same type, so there's no shinui kodesh, so this would also be kosher? Or do we say, no, it's not a fixed type of offering because it's olev yored, and therefore it's a different type of offering, and one type of offering for another type makes it no good? That's the question. Ravacha bered Rava matne kulahu lefsula. Mai ta'ama v'shachat ota lechatat l'shem hota chatat. Now that was all one version of the discussion. Ravacha, the son of Rava, had a different version of this discussion, in which Rav's original teaching was not that all these cases are kosher, but that all these cases are not kosher. That means even the simplest case of I ate cheleb and blood by mistake, and I brought a korban, I meant it to be for the cheleb, and the Kohen slaughters it for dam. Even that is no good, even though it's totally the same person and the same type. Why? Because the pasuk says you will slaughter it for as a chatat, for that v'shachatat ota, for that sin, and not for a different sin. Even if you did both sins, can't be for a different sin. They're all no good. That's Ravacha's, the son of Rava's version of what Rav said. Amar le Rav Asher le Rav Acha bere de Rava, Baya de Rava hechi matni tula. Says if so, if even that simple case is pasul, then what was Rava's follow-up question? Surely you agree that Rava learned that and asked a follow-up question. Well then, if even the simplest case is pasul, then what case would he be talking about? Amar le anan b'shinui ba'alim matninan la. And Rava said, Rava's follow-up question was about changing the owner, which is a different story than changing the type of korban. V'achi matninan la, and this is how we learned it. Amar Rava, chatat cheleb sheshechata al mi shemechoyav chatat dam vechatat avodah zarah pesula. Al mi shemechoyav chatat nazir vechatat mesorah keshera. Someone has to bring a chatat chelev, And then the person doing shechita said, I'm going to do the shechita for someone else. And that someone else has to bring also a chatat, but a chatat dam, or chatat avodah zarah. This is no good because it says v'chiped alav v'lo al chavero, and these are chavero, other people that have to bring a chatat because of a sin. So therefore, these are no good. But if he slaughters it on behalf of someone who has to bring a chatat as a nazir or because of a mesorah, these are okay because those chatats are not brought as because of a sin, but rather have the same law as a korban olah. That was the basic law that we know. And then the follow-up question was u'b'ayan la hachi ba'erava chatat cheleb shechata mi shemechuyab chatat tumat mikdash v'kadashav mahu miyamrinan karet kemota or dilma en kavua kemota. If someone is liable to bring a chatat cheleb, and then the kohen comes and does shechita on behalf of a different person, and that different person has to bring a chatat olev yored because of bringing tum'ah into the mikdash or for sacrificial foods. What about that case? Do we say that, well, both of these cases, if you did it on purpose, it would be karet. By mistake, it's shogeg, but it's also for a sin, and therefore it's the same type. And as the same type in shinui be'alim is no good, that would make it pasul. Or do we say, no, there's no en kabua kemota, there's no fixed offering that's similar to that. And so therefore it's different enough that you wouldn't call him chavero, and therefore it would be a kosher sacrifice. That was Rava's question, teko, and we left that unanswered. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.